that were developed it's all for free. You can just go on there and grab it and take it and just like show that you're in this as well. One of my favorite bands in the world is the Hardworking Americans, and they did this song, and other people have done similar songs. We're all in this together, and that's what really that part of it's all about. We're all in this together. So please, if you've got a minute, go to thecureis.us and just look it over and show your solidarity with everyone else. Through that use of that phrase.
That's pretty cool. The fact that you tied it back to a band that you like is pretty fascinating.
Hardworking Americans, man.
You got a steel trap.
Yeah, it's a jam band, and a guy named, and this I'll tie something else in. A guy named Todd Snyder, who's one of my favorite singer-songwriters, folk musician. He's a bit of a character. He's a really good friend of another of my favorite singer-songwriters, is John Prine, who is fighting for his life right now with COVID-19. But anyway, Todd Snyder is in that band. He's the singer. And then a guy from La Crosse, Chad Staley, is the keyboard player in the band. And he is co-owner of a thing up in a distillery up in La Crosse called La Crosse Distilling. And they switched over their production of alcohol, some of which I have upstairs and I like very much, to producing hand sanitizer. And they're producing it, and from what I understand, man, they're giving it away.
That's really super cool. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you hear about, and you talk about solidarity. What an incredible thing that some of these businesses are able to do to completely shift and change their gears.
Yeah. Another one is a young man. Well, he's not so young anymore, but Hatch Distilling up in Door County. Guy used to work for me when I had a landscape business, and he got into the distilling business, and he's doing that up there. And both of those businesses are basing their production, when it's not for hand sanitizer, on pollinators and good conservation work. Like they're making, I know that Chris up at Hatch Distilling is they're using bees and the honey from the bees, but then the bees are doing the pollinating, and all of these things are tied together. And it goes back to the phrase, we're all in this together. Check that song out by the Hardworking Americans. And it will.
I'm going to.
Else, you'll get up and move around in the house when that's going on. Anyway, those are the kinds of things that I think are just, just super cool. And that's the kind of solidarity that I love seeing about this kind of stuff. And, with my, it's not ours, it's just our turn phrase. There are t-shirts coming out, both on my site and then on another one that is much more popular than mine. And those will be out eventually. So that's part of why I'm holding my stuff back. But Meat Eater and I've been working on it. That the reason I'm starting to sell merch, and it'll be out soon. Follow me on Doug Duren at Instagram. Is that money, or selling that material, is doing two things. One is spreading that phrase and spreading that word and that ethic, right? It's not ours, it's just our turn. Conservation ethic, and then the money that I get from it, I'm turning back into some other conservation efforts. And when I go out and get this opportunity to talk about CWD, a lot of times it's like, I'd like to come and do it, but man, it's like a day off of work to drive up there. And,
it's labor of love at that point, right?
Difficult to do. Yeah. I mean, now and I'm self-employed, and then I'm trying to do a little more of an education center at the farm. I hope to do a walk or a drop-in art installation out there about conservation, and those are the kind of efforts that I want to put that towards, So and these guys like La Crosse Distilling and Hatch Distilling and my friend Matt and his buddy at thecures.us, it's inspiring stuff, and I like to try to inspire and I love being inspired, and it's pleasant surprise. It's just not all about, what's in it for me. So enough about that.
I think it's you're definitely doing a lot, even like the stuff with the meat eater. I don't know. That's a different ball game at that point, right? The recognition and kind of notoriety you get on that. You mentioned before we hit the record button, like being in Alaska, and that's starting to now get picked up by cable networks, and so the delayed impact of people starting to learn who you are as a result of doing that stuff. I can't imagine what that's like navigating personally. Having all of that outreach on social media.
Well, you keep doing your stuff on this podcast, man, and you'll figure it out. Yeah, no, that whole thing with Steve was such a happy accident. Just getting to be friends with him. I heard of him about a dozen years ago. Read some of his stuff. I reached out. He reached back. Next thing you know, we became friends, and then all this other stuff happened. So it was just like I said, this big happy accident. So I kind of feel like this happened serendipitously, and honestly, he answered an email from me. That's how we got to be friends.
And was it just the one? Because usually you hear these stories and it's like, oh, you had to send a whole bunch through. You must have just had some serendipity on your side in terms of that landing and having enough to catch his attention.
Well, I'd like to think it was a well-reasoned and insightful email, but it was. Steve and I got to be friends not because I'm some great hunter or anything like that, like he is, but much more because of, obviously we're interested in that, and my interest in conservation, and he's interested in that. But also because we're just like, we talk about movies and we talk about music, and we, and we give each other the berries in a way that, I don't know if you've ever heard, I called in and I gave him hell about something that he said about CWD, and all the hours and hours and hours and hours that he talks. He made one comment about CWD, and I called him and I gave him hell, and he and I were arguing, yelling at each other on the telephone. And I just said, dude, you cannot say that. And he's like,
do you remember what he said?
And I'm sorry?
Do you remember what he said?
About CWD?
Yeah, still now that pissed you off so much?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember exactly what he said, but let's not go there.
Okay.
But, I'll tell you what he said. He was talking with the guys from Quality Year Management Association, and he said the biggest concern that I have, or I wish he would have said it, was the biggest concern that I have. But he said the only thing. And I happened to be, it was so weird because they were doing this podcast, and I was staying with a couple of buddies. We were trout fishing out in Montana. I was 3 blocks away. Had I heard it live, I'd have probably drove down there, walked in there, and grabbed him by the back of the neck and said, "You can't say that," because that's kind of the relationship he and I had. But it was weird because I happened to be there, and he said the only thing that I'm concerned about is human. If it jumps to humans. Other than that, it's just another disease that kills deer. And I was listening to the podcast because, they record them and then they play them a couple of weeks later. Yeah. And I was literally doing some work in a machine, and I stopped the machine while I was listening, and I was like, backed it up, listened again. I was like, oh my God. And I sent him an email and then a text message and said, I just sent you an email and I'd like you to read it. And 5 minutes later he called, and then he didn't, and rightly so. He didn't think that he thought I was maybe being a little over the top, which I can be from time to time. But I just said, man, you don't, at the position that you're in, that's the kind of stuff that people can isolate and say, well, Steve Rinella doesn't think it's that big of a deal. But he does know it's a big deal. So I called in, he asked me to call into the podcast, a few weeks later, and we talked about it a little bit, and he apologized and much more than I did. It just kind of shows you the kind of guy that he is and what his concerns are too about he takes what he says very seriously. The dude, I'm actually writing a song right now that is about meat eater, and it's a long story why, but the guy, he loves to talk, but he also walks the walk. And one of the reasons he and I are, as I said, are such, I think why we got to be such friends is that we can disagree with each other. We've had other very heated discussions. We can disagree with each other, but we also keep our mind open enough to listen to what the other guy is saying. And I know I've changed his mind, and I tell you, there's some things that he's changed mine about, or at least given me another perspective. And I think that's a sign of a real friendship. And I think, he's got two brothers. I had three, but I still have two brothers, and we're all real close. And there's just a lot of parallels between him and I, other than the big differences that I'm, 15 years older than he is. But Steve Rinella is probably the most solid human being I've ever met in my life.
That's
just
cool.
from a integrity standpoint.
It's good to hear that. You see people on TV and you wonder, but I'm gonna interrupt you because
go ahead.
We got a caller here. We got Kyle giving us a call. Hey Kyle, you're live on the Where to Hunt podcast. Our guest is Doug Duren. How you doing?
Doing all right. Yourself?
Good. Wow, you sound nice and clear. You must have a fancy microphone on that phone.
I said, no, I actually don't this time. I'm out of the wind though this time. So
there you go.
Doug Duren, big fan. Great to hear you great to hear on Eric's podcast. And Eric and I talk often. I actually grew up in Waukesha area, but live up in Hudson now. And I grew up hunting down in Platteville, Lancaster area. So kind of all over, but that, the CWD thing hit home hard down there. I remember every deer basically we had were getting dropped off, getting tested, back when I started hunting and everything like that. And then it kind of tapered off, and stations and stuff like that stopped necessarily testing. Everything became more voluntary than it did mandatory. But, I haven't been down there for the years with going to the military and everything, but now being up in Hudson area, I know we have a couple of cases up here. And last year I actually physically saw a doe on a trail camera that looked real bad, and then didn't see any more pictures of her. So I'm assuming worse got to her, but, just kind of something to keep an eye out. I know it's a oddball question, but, I just pulled some trail cameras the other day, and actually still have bucks up here with antlers on. So I know you're big with into herd management and everything. Is that something to keep an eye out for? Or is that something that can be common with how the weather's going? Or is that something that, to look into?
Well, if you're asking me, does it have anything to do with chronic wasting disease? I would say probably not. Again, now I don't want to start talking like a deer biologist, because I'm not. But it's interesting, isn't it? They say, and I wish Eric, maybe that would be a suggestion, by the way, is to have Eric Canania on sometime. He's a great guy and a good deer biologist, but a great deer biologist, I should say. I would say that that might be a sign of a milder winter. I'm just speculating, of course, but, sometimes they drop them earlier. What causes it? I'd be mostly speculating, but it's pretty interesting though. The first meat eater that I did with in season 1, we had some landowner management tags, and so it was literally the last day of February, and I shot we had pushed some deer, and they came out, and I remember Dan Doty was both the producer and the cameraman, and there were these deer milling around, and I had this one. I was trying to get a doe because there was a bunch of small bucks, and they all had their antlers yet. And I was like, I can't shoot one of them. They're all bucks. And I just remember Dan kind of whispering in my ear, because this buck was standing broadside. I had a beautiful shot at him. He goes, yes, you can. And but I just remember there was a whole group too. So I don't think it's that unusual, although it's the end of March now. These camera photos are from the last few days.
Yeah, was March 28th. and then I think on the, what's today, the 1st? 28th, 29th, basically 2 days is one. I had a night photo and a daylight photo, and one's probably a 4-point, possibly going into a little spiker 6, and then the other one's a 6-point. So I mean, but they're younger deer, but just out of everything I've saw, it was just kind of crazy. And I mean, they're some of them were herded up, but just something kind of crazy. You know, I was walking a property and didn't really find any sheds, and then I moved some cameras and I caught them, and I just kind of caught my attention. I was just like, wow, you know, just wondering what's going on. And so
yeah, it's interesting. I love stuff like that. You know, it's just anecdotal and things that stick in your head. And I guess I would suggest is, you know, if you don't have a journal, to start one and write stuff like that down. My wife and I are always paying attention to what's happening around our cabin, and then now here on our place here in Kaz, the ice is out on the lake 2 weeks sooner than it was last year. You know, so all those kinds of things. To me, that just observing nature and all of that, and it helps you kind of. I think it helps you, one, appreciate things more, but then also, you know, maybe helps to form a feeling about conservation.
It's a good question.
Right on. Do you mind if I ask one more?
Yeah, no,
quick,
please
or
go ahead. This is a good opportunity.
So, Doug, I brought this up to Eric and Greg today, with the, come April on the 13th, we're supposed to be in the DNR. We're supposed to be going to each county and have meetings. But with the COVID situation, they've kind of pushed everything online. With the 2020 proposed changes to the hunting seasons, and I know there's various with, you know, different ammunition, there's fishing changes and stuff like that, but more so to the deer regulations and everything. And I don't necessarily want to get one side or anything. I was just wondering, I mean, do you have any, have you had any
have an
insight
opinion?
I'm going to interrupt here. Kyle, you picked the perfect time because I was looking to actually try and figure out a way of putting that in there. But you beat me to it, which is good. So I'd rather have it come from a listener calling in than me throwing it out there. So, perfect timing for that, I think. Go ahead.
Yes. So you're talking about the Conservation Congress meetings, which all happen on the same day, and there are advisory questions, of course, that the public gets to have input into, and the ones about deer hunting that you are asking about were actually placed on the docket by a couple of members of the Natural Resources Board. My opinion is this: if I could wave a wand, we would have a longer gun season. We would be able to hunt with crossbows. We would continue to hunt. The crossbows have been a very positive thing, given my opinion, for archery, in that it is there are a growing number of people hunting with crossbows. There are a declining number of people gun hunting, and we've all seen the numbers. You know, it's that there are fewer and fewer. So why would we take away one of the things that's? Why would we take away one of the growing parts of hunting? It just doesn't. That doesn't make sense to me. I think there are other things at play there. That may not be. It may be in the best interest of a particular group or a group of people who are interested in protecting their particular way of hunting. But I don't understand that either. Again, let's go back to Richland County. It's a great example. Richland County 85% of our county is deer habitat. 95% of that habitat is privately owned. And I know you guys talk a lot about public land. There's actually some that at 5% of public.
10.
So if a landowner doesn't want somebody using a crossbow on their place, then it's fine. Then say, hey, we're not using crossbows on my place. If they don't want them to bow hunt, then fine. I don't know many places that don't allow bow hunters because of gun hunting. I do know some landowners or people who control a piece of property who bow hunt it and then don't gun hunt it. And I don't know that that's it may be a good policy for them in particular, but I know it's not a good deer management policy. We actually, I'm not much of a bow hunter. I have a crossbow. I quit vertical bow hunting a while ago. Just I never did it very much, and some of that's just because as I've said before, with my tongue in my cheek. But there's some truth to it that bow hunting is for people who don't have enough to do. But I also have a lot of respect for people who have committed to that, to being proficient bow hunters, and I have some friends who are. It's almost a lifestyle, right? They practice a lot. And that's great. But and fine if that's what they want to do. But to somehow prevent other people from doing it doesn't make any sense to me at all. Especially when it comes down to it. One of the things that the Department of Natural Resources has learned is that if you're going to do deer management, you're going to need the holders involved, and that's what we've done with the CDACs, the County Deer Advisory Councils. So we have stakeholders involved. We in Southwest Wisconsin, almost every CDAC in Southwest Wisconsin has asked for more tools, and most of the tools to manage. The only tools that we have are things like number of antlerless tags and whether we're going to have a holiday hunt, and then if we're going to allow bow hunting through the end of January. We've talked about things like bringing back Ernebuck, which I was a proponent of, and then some other folks have come up with the idea of a bonus buck, that if you shoot a doe and submit it for testing, that there's a paper trail immediately that we could have, then you'd get another buck tag. And I haven't really talked to anybody, even guys or hunters who were against Ernebuck, who were against the bonus buck idea. I don't know that would get us to some of the management objectives, but we're trying to do two things in Richland County, for instance, and our surrounding counties. And that is to control population and control disease. Not just for us, but for the future as well. And I think that so much of what those proposals are sort of short-sighted. The muzzleloader, the extension of the gun season is another one, which I think is a good idea. I happened to be a part of a conversation one day with a couple of the executive folks from the Muzzleloaders Association, and it was believed that they were going to be upset about the idea of extending the gun season into the muzzleloader season, and they just said, it won't bother us a bit, which I was pleasantly surprised to hear. And I asked about it, and they said, well, honestly, anybody who's a serious muzzleloader hunter takes that thing out opening day of gun season, because it's a rifle, it's a gun, and you can use it then too. And I went, never even occurred to me. The restricting of the crossbow, bad idea. I mean, that's my opinion. What were some of the other ones? I can't even remember. Some of them are just ridiculous.
Restricting of the crossbow. Questions 10 through 24. I've got it laid out because I'm in the process of putting together an article for a blog.
The biggest thing I know is they were talking about is suspending seasons and giving that timeout break between seasons and everything, rather than leading, one-to-one and stuff.
They're giving you two different choices. It's, 3. 2 days off, 5 days off, or no days off. So basically from the end of bow season to the beginning of gun season, you get a vote of 2 days between the two seasons, 5 days, or leave it alone. Which some of this stuff, if you're reading through it, you're looking at going, boy, this is pretty contradictory. So you got to kind of weed through it and hope to God you're interpreting it correctly. So
it's as if they're looking for it's as if they're looking for a problem, right?
Yeah.
What's the problem with that? The only explanation I heard for the quiet period was that it was going to generate excitement for the gun season.
Yeah, that's exactly what they word in here. Generate excitement for the gun season.
I just scratch my head and go, well,
I'm excited for that right now. Give me a freaking break. How do you change that many things and expect to be able to measure any of it? If you want to measure something and know what its impact is, you can't do 20 things at once. You'll never know what the thing was that impacted it. And so, Doug, I think you're right. It's like, what are you trying to cause here? Uproar? Like, because they're going to get that. I'm certain.
I feel like the excitement before gun season is opening day of archery season. And since they freed the laws on who can use crossbows, I mean, doesn't that basically give you all that time leading up into firearm season of getting more hunters out into the woods, giving them more time? I mean, the biggest thing about opening day gun season in Wisconsin is depending on what the weather's going to be like and depending where you are. I mean, some days it's 40s, other days it's 10 degrees and with, a foot of snow. So why not try to get more people out there while the weather is nicer rather than, trying to just bury them in 1 week of gun season. And the biggest thing I, think about gun season is I always went out opening weekend and then that week was, spent with family during the holidays. And sometimes I went out the following weekend, but I know it's, split half and half where some families go together for the holidays and go hunt or other ones, go spend time. But, if you're going to make one season stop, so another season can go, why not just have as many people out in the woods? I mean, if you're out bow hunting in the woods during gun season, you still have to wear blaze orange. You're still following the same laws. So, what's the idea, I guess, with stopping seasons and, letting, one certain type of firearm or, thing be used?
Oh, exactly. I would say, here's a tip. My buddy Pat Durkin can be a little bit controversial sometimes in his articles and his writing. But and another guy that I discuss things with and sometimes heatedly. But he wrote a couple of pretty good articles about this. And I would say he's got a blog that his weekly columns go up on, and then often they end up on Wisconsin Outdoor News. Go and read what he wrote about it. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'd say a couple of other things about it. One is, okay, so now you want to have this calm before the deer season to build up excitement. Well, let's look at a couple of different scenarios. One is, what if you've got folks who bow hunt and gun hunt, and they, especially if we've got that early gun opener. Last year we had a late gun opener, but you have that early gun opener, and guy says, you know what, here's what I'm gonna do. And I know people who've done this. I'm going to take off a few days before gun season. I'm going to bow hunt, and then I will be there for the opening weekend of gun hunting, because guess what? I want to be elsewhere with my family, friends, or whatever over the Thanksgiving holiday.
For sure. I know people that are that way too.
And so having that kind of opportunity, right, where somebody could do those two things in the same week. The other part of it is, or another example, I should say, is, I don't know how many years ago it's been now, that we did a couple of Meat Eater episodes with my dear friends, Helen Cho and Brittany Brothers, and friends of Steve's also. And they came down or they came out from, at that time the show was out of New York, and they came out and we went squirrel hunting, and they did their first deer hunts, and people are like, oh, they must have come and squirrel hunted a couple of weeks beforehand. And then because you certainly wouldn't have anybody squirrel hunting right before the gun season. And it makes me laugh every time I hear it. We literally squirrel hunted Friday afternoon, the day before opening day, and we shot a bushel basket full of squirrels. And Helen and Brittany had a blast. In fact, they said, I think I enjoyed squirrel hunting as much, if not more, than gun hunting in some ways. And I remember my nephew saying to me, "Hey, Uncle Doug, you're not going to squirrel hunt back there where I gun hunt, are you?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, Sam, that's where we're going." And he's like, "But I'm going to be gun hunting there tomorrow." And it's like, "Yeah, I know. It'll be all right," which is one of my favorite expressions. It'll be all right. The next morning, he actually took out the guy who came along and was our chef, who was Helen's
husband.
Boyfriend.
Is it?
No, not husband, but boyfriend, and or better half or whatever, significant other. That's the word I'm looking for. And at 7, barely after shooting light, Sam shot a 140 class buck right where we had been squirrel hunting. I mean, right under, it fell under one of the trees we had been shooting squirrels out of. So that deer didn't give two hoots about what had happened there the day before, and he didn't come running in there. He was just going about his business. And I know that, there's guys who are going to say, "Oh yeah, well, like I don't want you squirrel hunting in my bow hunting woods or something like that because it messes up the deer." But anyway, why take away opportunity? As you guys may know, the two biggest impediments for bringing new hunters into hunting, new people into hunting, is somebody to go with and a place to go.
For sure.
If we have more opportunity, if we expand opportunity, I'm going to be more. I mean, hey man, opening weekend, that's kind of my time, right? I mean, I have a bunch of folks hunt with me, and some of them are new hunters and stuff. And I've been opening the farm up, and I've got a group of people, and then I invite a couple of other people, and it's just been really it's been a hoot. I mean, the last handful of years, I've had over 30 people gun hunt our farm over the course of the 9-day, the 4-day, and then the antlerless season and all of that. But I mean, we also will shoot as many as the most we've ever shot were 32 deer on the farm.
Jeez, yeah, that's what you're saying.
Guns. But and you can't even tell when it comes to population because there's a lot of people around who just the pressure isn't the way it used to be, right? But anyway,
Right.
The point of that is that the more opportunity, the more people. A guy like me who opening weekend's kind of my time. I'd be more open to allowing other people onto the property then. And so especially because I have management goals in mind, both numbers and actually there aren't any. We used to have restrictions on the farm, and I don't have any at all anymore. Just shoot a deer that you're going to be happy with and make a good ethical shot and get it tested, and all of those things are a part of it. But then it's also the kind of thing where later on in that season, I might go, "Hey, yeah, I've taken all kinds of folks out who are, some of them are real experienced hunters and some of them are not." And expanding the opportunity expands both the opportunities for hunting and then opportunities for other people, for more experienced hunters to take other people out. Why would you restrict that? It makes no sense to me at all.
Good question. So Mitch Baker actually commented and reminded us that these are just questions to gauge the interest, and it's not stuff they're actually going to do. So,
Not
thank
only
you,
will they
Mitch.
engage interest, but they will also raise hairs on backs of necks and get tempers flared, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think I used to think this way, fellas, and it's taken me a long time to kind of get there, but there's a selfishness in it, right? Like if Doug Duren gets that deer, my neighbor didn't get it, right? So it took me a while. I mean, it was a few years ago when we were doing buck management. I mean, the biggest thing I was congratulating neighbors on was when they would get a nice buck. And I remember the one neighbor saying, "I'm just shocked that you stopped by here and were so happy for me." I'm like, "Well, why? That was the idea." And he goes, "It pisses me off every time I know that when you guys shoot another big one." I'm like, huh. Well, then they're not our deer, right? They're not my deer. I may control the land that they're on, but they're everybody's deer.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, but I remember saying to that guy, but you're doing exactly what we had talked about. Now I've changed my mentality about that, right? And we're still shooting some beautiful bucks, but older bucks and stuff. But I quit. I just quit all of that stuff, and it was really take a good ethical shot, take a deer you're going to be happy with. We'll all be happy with it. Get it tested, because I got tired of managing people. And it took, when people keep saying we got to put the fun back in deer hunting. Well, that's one way you do it, is to get rid of that kind of, expectation. I've actually encouraged everybody who hunts on my place, kill a buck. I'm trying to, and I don't care if it's a spike or whatever. It used to be on our place, man. You had to wear a sombrero if you shot too small of a deer or a nubber or anything like that. And it was fun and funny, but we were never any fines or anything like that. Just a little ridicule and good-natured humor between friends. But I got upset with a friend of mine one time, and it wasn't that many years ago, about it. And then I just I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't want to be that guy. And you want to talk about bringing the fun back into into deer hunting. That certainly is one of the things that did. And I've had a blast opening my place up to more hunters. And I will say this before I start getting bombarded by questions about, can I come and hunt on your farm by folks on social media or whatever. It's sort of like Green Bay Packer tickets. It's a really long list. And I have a friend who actually got season Packer tickets recently, and he still doesn't know why, because he wasn't on the list that long. And I said, well, it's just serendipitous, I guess. So there's no rhyme or reason sometimes to how, who I end up inviting and things like that. I mean, it's usually people who are interested or interesting, because that's what I'm about, is interesting people. And then the other thing that my expectation is from folks is that they are making a contribution to conservation. Not about, this was a forester said this to me, it's not about what you take from the woods when you're doing forestry. You need to really think about what it is that you're leaving. So one of the questions I have for folks who I end up considering inviting, because it's still by invitation, it's not wide open. That's not something that I'm interested in. Is just opening the place wide open to folks. Is like, well, what have you done to contribute to conservation? I mean, why are you interested in hunting? I mean, I've had people write to me and say, I really want to kill a big giant buck, so I'd really like to come and hunt with you. Well, that's not going to get you on my place. And I get a lot of requests, and I wish I could. I try to answer every message that I get from people, and those who email me too. I don't think I've ever not.
Well, we're proof of that, because we're talking right now, and you got back to me, and we've had a good conversation, and now we're having another one, and at some point it'd be fun when all this virus stuff is done to maybe have a bonfire together and have some conversation over some of those nice drinks you got upstairs you're talking about.
Yeah. Conversations about conservation, because it's a lot of different things that we can talk about. So I try to answer everybody, and I really appreciate that people reach out to me. And it's just, gosh, it's so gratifying. And honestly, it's humbling that I get some heartfelt stuff from people. And it's like, I just hope that I, live up to try to live up.
You're doing okay.
People's
You're doing okay.
Well, it's kind of weird because I'm an all right guy, as Todd Snyder would say. I think I'm an all right guy, but I certainly have my flaws, and some of them are pretty glaring. Folks just don't see them.
Yeah. Well, you're right at home here on the okayest podcast in the Midwest. So, talking to the okayest hunter. I think you're in good company here.
Man, honestly, that is when I saw that, I just laughed and I said, yeah, I got to talk to this guy.
Yeah, we keep it real here. We don't, we're real people. We're trying to learn as much as we can. We learn, from the masses. There's not one single expert that's going to teach us everything. I think the collective pool of people that contribute to this show over the last 7 years have, helped inform, just my thought process and how I think about things. then you're going to be a big one for that. I think this is shaping up to be a pretty informative episode with some good thoughts. I mean, the comments coming through are really positive. Kyle, I'm the time Nazi of the show. I'm going to kick you out of here, and we're going to hear Doug's memorable hunt, and we'll keep rolling. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Appreciate it, Doug, for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
All right, see you guys.
See you, Kyle.
Mainly because I just want to make sure I can enjoy a bonfire tonight, Doug. But no, I asked the question early on and had you think about it. If you had to pick one or a top one of three or something, what's your most memorable hunt?
Man, I had some with my dad that are fantastic, and I can't ever talk about hunting or conservation and not mention my father. So I need to do this again. He's the guy. I remember him telling me when I was a kid, and telling my brothers and I when I was a kid. He goes, "Well, when you're hunting, you're not just hunting for yourself. You're hunting with a group of guys." He used to go and do deer drives and stuff way up north back in the day. The real deer hunting, he used to call it. But as far as my personal most memorable hunt, it has to be the one that you can all go. It sounds like a terrible plug, but you can go and watch it on Netflix. It's also on the Outdoor Channel or something right now. It's on Netflix on the Meat Eater site. It's the Alaska caribou hunt that I did with Steve and Mark Kenyon, and Yannis Patelis was along. Chris Gill was one of the cameramen, Ridge Pounder, Brody Henderson, Dirt Myth, Garrett Smith, and God, am I forgetting somebody? There were 7 of us. Steve, Yanni. Anyway, it was really memorable, and you can see it on. It's a cool thing for a guy like me to have a hunt like that recorded, because I'd never done anything like that before. And to have, my buddy Steve take me up there, and it was incredible. It was the first time I met Mark. He said Mark Kenyon, who I've come to I've grown very, very fond of Mark Kenyon. But I got to tell you this quick story. I'd been staying at Steve's place for a couple of nights. I got out to Seattle a little early, and I spent a couple of nights in town visiting friends and hanging out and stuff. And then Steve and his family got back, and I went and stayed with him. And we're going to the airport, and we get there, and it's all these dudes that I've done other stuff with, right? Because I'd already done 5 or 6 episodes, and it's the first time I'm going to meet Kenyon, and I knew what was going on. It's before all the beef became a part of Meat Eater, but I knew this was kind of, Steve wanted to get a cut of his jib, and he wanted my opinion of the guy. And, and Mark is young enough to be my son. I mean, I'm twice his age. And so we show up to the airport, and there's Mark, and there's the guys, and I'm just like, all these guys that I know, and there's Mark, and he's, kind of younger than everybody else. And he's a little quirky. And at that time I thought it was weird, but now I just think it's endearing. And first thing he says to me, because I guess he doesn't know what else to say to me, he goes, "Well, so Doug, what kind of pre-rut activity are you seeing out there in Wisconsin?" And I just looked at him like, "Huh? I'm going to Alaska on a caribou hunt, and you want to talk about white-tailed deer?" Nah. And I was just like, let me get back to you. I need to get a drink. And it was so fun to do that. And he was kind of annoying for a part of that hunt. And again, he was sort of the man out because the rest of us knew everybody, but he's just such a wonderful guy, and I've really come to like him. But that hunt, and to be where we were in the 40 Mile River area, and we were seeing 1,000 caribou a day.
Oh, wow.
Or more. I saw 1,000 bull caribou. I mean, all 3 of the ones that we killed were in the top, 50 years ago. And, always wanted to. Then he met my mom. He was in college, and he was going to even his brothers and some other guys to their shack on Prince of Wales Island fishing. And my dad just loved those stories. And he passed away between the 3rd fishing trip and the Alaska episode where we went up there. And I actually had some of his ashes in a spent 3006 shell in my pocket the entire trip.
Wow. And
my intention was to leave that up there. So when you watch it, Steve doesn't even know this. I never told him anything about it. But when you watch that episode and I shoot the caribou, and I get very emotional. I'm kind of an emotional guy, but I got particularly emotional, and part of it was because of my dad and what happened there, and having him along with me. And I had intended to leave that 3006 shell up there in the 40 Mile River, Yukon area, and I didn't. I brought it back with me and took it and put it under his favorite deer stand on the farm. So he went to Alaska and completed the whole circle of doing it. So that was my favorite hunt, and tying my dad into it as well.
That's pulling the heartstrings a little bit there. Damn it, Doug. Yeah, man. That's
it was
that is sentimental.
Fantastic opportunity. And I just feel so fortunate to have become friends with Steve, and been a part of, I was the guy who introduced him to Vortex Optics, and to be around these last, really the last 10 years and watching both of their stars rise the way that they have. Hell, I remember when Vortex just had that one building out down there in Middleton, and now they got this enormous facility out in Barneville, and got them together, and just a lot of serendipitous stuff that I just feel super fortunate. And I guess the only downside I would say about Steve's popularity is it's a little between that and when I met him, he had just gotten married, didn't have any kids. Well, now, he's got 3 kids, and I know and love them all. And with the popularity of the show and MeatEater, the whole MeatEater juggernaut, it's just a heck of a lot easier to get, it's very difficult, a lot more difficult to get time to go hunting with my buddy. That's the downside of it. But I've met so many people that's the balance. And
interesting.
Anyway.
It's a good way to put it, the balance. Yeah. And it just go back to your story for 2 seconds, that having that experience in such a vast landscape must have played into it a lot too. I can't imagine. But man, Doug, thank you for doing this with us today. We got the, Kyle called in. I'm glad that, we at least got single caller to call in. I think everyone's outside on this nice day. That's my belief, but,
yeah,
it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Well, you hit the record button, right?
I did remember to hit the record button. This is the OKest podcast, so I'm allowed enough.
So you can maybe you can replay it at another time, or edit it and take out some of my nonsense. But
no, we keep
I'm really
it.
glad we
keep
did
it
it
going.
too, man.
Yeah.
And happy to take the time, and I guess conservation. It's not ours; it's just our turn.
Well summed up. And just as a last kind of call out to make sure people know where to find you, you called out Instagram, and that sounds like that's probably the best place to follow along, see what you're up to, and if anyone wants to reach out, seems like eventually you'll get to them at some point.
Yep, at Doug Duren on Instagram. Soon I'll be making an announcement about a website, and people have been asking me about the merchandise. I've got stickers and magnets, and we've got some hats coming, and I just didn't want to. I wanted to have everything in place before we put it out, and so that's all coming out. And I also, I felt a little weird about launching anything like that with people dying and all these things going on. But it seems like the folks that I've talked to about it were like, "Come on, put it out there. People need the distraction too, and people are interested in it and the message." So hopefully in the next week or so you'll see something from me on Instagram.
Very good. Well, we'll help push it out as much as we can, although our audience size might not be as big as yours, but every little bit helps. So we'll keep an eye out for that. Send us a message when it comes out. We'll help promote.
Cool.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. I'm going to end the live broadcast, and stay tuned. We'll get this published this evening.